Hello, and welcome to the 34th episode of Course Place. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me for today's conversation. In today's episode, I will be sharing my perspective on forgiveness and friendship losses. As always, if you like what you hear, please leave a review and/or comments, follow my podcast, and tell your friends. Also, please follow the podcast page I've made on Facebook. If you'd like to contact me via email instead of a Facebook message, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org. If you are new here, welcome. I'm your host, Cora, and I am so excited to have you on this journey with me. Before I get into today's topic, I want to share today's truth talk. Today's truth is, your sins have been forgiven by God. One verse that I think fits this the most is, "For by grace you have been saved, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast." That is Ephesians 2:8-9 in the New King James Version. Those of us who call ourselves Christians are not saved by the good things we have done. We are saved because of God's grace that flows freely in and through our lives. I am so thankful that God gives me grace in my life when I stumble and fall. Not necessarily stumble and fall in a literal sense, but when I struggle with difficult situations in my life. Now, sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy today's episode. Today, I want to talk to you about my perspective on forgiveness and friendship losses. I also want to share a personal story from my life of a time when forgiveness was hard for me. I have made a couple different episodes on forgiveness, so feel free to go back and listen to those as well. They are episodes 7 and 12. Forgiveness is something that I think a lot of us struggle with at times, and it can be really hard to give too. I know and I understand that it might feel impossible to give to someone who has deeply wounded you, but we have to be forgiving or else that will harden our hearts, and it can also make it so hard to trust others. I want to work on being more forgiving in my own life because I want to have a soft heart that is willing to change. It won't always be easy though, so don't get discouraged when it isn't going as well as you would like. Sometimes, progress can look like 3 steps forward and 4 steps backward, or maybe 5 steps forward and 6 steps backward. I think it is normal to have times of success in your progress of forgiveness and also have times of messing up. You won't get everything perfect all the time, and that's okay. Forgiveness is so tricky to navigate sometimes, and it can potentially even be messy too, depending on the situation. You will mess it up sometimes. Don't let that discourage you from persevering through it, though. It takes time and effort to become good at anything. Some things may come easier to you than other things. That's okay, though. I think every person faces that at some point in life. I know I definitely have. Please know that you are not alone when things are hard. It may feel like you are alone, but the truth is that God is still by your side. Forgiveness won't come naturally. It takes practice. I think the most important thing we need to remember, meaning myself included as well, is that it's okay to struggle with forgiveness sometimes and that we aren't alone. Everyone goes through times where it's hard to forgive someone. I have definitely faced that in my life, and even though it is painful at first, it does get better. Forgiveness is a hard thing to give, and it's also a hard thing to ask for sometimes. It can be especially hard when you face a huge hurt in your life. Later on in this episode, I will share a story of a time that I faced a huge hurt in my own life that I had to forgive. Stay tuned for that coming up soon in this episode. Before I get into my story of a time in my life where I had to forgive a huge hurt, I just want to mention a few really quick things. The first is that I'm still working on forgiveness, even in the story I'm about to share, so please don't think that I have gotten it right all the time. The second is that I don't mean any of what I'm about to say as an attempt to get revenge at this person. I really just want to share my side of the story and my feelings about the situation. The third thing is that forgiveness takes practice, time, and perseverance to get better at it. The final thing is that this situation I'm about to mention still makes me feel frustrated or hurt about it sometimes. I think it is possible there will always be a part of me that feels sad or frustrated when I think about it. I'm not really sure why that is, but one possible reason could be that it was a big loss in my life that came unexpectedly and kind of suddenly too. Now, I want to share this story, so don't go away. Let me begin this story by just giving a quick disclaimer. I want to say that I will not be sharing the name of the person this situation is/was with. I will go into some detail about it, but I will not share some parts of it due to it involving other people or because my memory is a little bit fuzzy with that situation. Now that I have addressed that, let's just dive right into the story. I want to tell a story of a really hard time in my life. This may be a long story, so I just want to warn you now with a disclaimer before I launch into the story. I also want to add a disclaimer that I may still sound like I am mad at her in some of my words. I'm still kind of hurt by the situation, but it is a lot better than it was for the first little while. The hard time was in 2020. I had this friend who I was so extremely close to. She felt like a sister to me, and we talked about pretty much everything. I only knew her for a few years, but those few years were amazing. I had invited her to my birthday party that year. The thing is, though, that I also invited someone she had cut off contact with from when we were in a youth group together. I invited both of them because it felt like the right thing to do, but I felt concerned they weren't going to get along. It worked out, though, because they came at separate times. I told my friend a few days or so after my party that I had invited the person she cut off contact with, and I apologized to her. All seemed pretty much fine after that, but one day, a couple of weeks later, she just stopped responding to my texts and calls, which wasn't normal at all. I found out at one point, not too long after that day, that her phone was broken, but our friendship was fine. The reason she hadn't been texting or calling was because of her phone being broken. It probably took about a couple of weeks or so, but she eventually got her phone fixed. We talked for a couple weeks after that, and then one day, out of the blue, she calls me and starts blaming me for a situation that happened a few years prior to that call. I didn't even know about the situation until she said something. We texted for a few days after that, but our conversations were just not the same. They weren't as deep, meaningful, fun, or happy as they had been before that point. Then, she stopped responding to my texts and calls again a few days later. By this point, it was August. The day I actually realized my friendship with her was just gone, I felt sad, mad, hurt, confused, and shocked. It was a hard day when I realized it. I didn't really tell a ton of people at the time, but I did tell a handful of close friends. The next days in the aftermath of that huge storm left me feeling confused and hurt. I grieved that huge loss for a long time. I still grieve it sometimes, but usually not as much as I did at first. I didn't know how to process the loss for a while, but giving it time and talking with some other friends seemed to help some. Even though that happened a few years ago, as of the recording of this episode that is, I still struggle with it sometimes, and I miss the good parts and the good memories of that friendship. This person and I had made some really good memories together when we were still friends, even though we didn't get to see each other very often. I think we both helped each other through hard things we each faced. Sometimes I still wish I had that friendship, but at times it seems like not having that friendship is a good thing for me too, in a way. I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily, I just know there are some people you should not be friends with. I think I was just too blinded by my excitement over that friendship, and I didn't realize for a long time that this friendship was actually kind of rough, and one I probably shouldn't have allowed to let happen in the first place. The weird thing, though, is that this friendship actually seemed normal for the majority of the time we were friends, but then things went quite downhill just before it eventually totally broke. Another weird thing is that it seemed like we both cared about each other in the beginning, but then that also faded when the friendship broke. That friendship had started out as something I hoped would last from that point on, but I can see now that it wasn't necessarily a healthy friendship, and I should be pouring my time and energy into healthy friendships that I know will help me get closer to God and ones who I care about. I am so thankful to have a few friendships now that I love so much, and I'm so thankful that God chose to give them to me. While I still miss having that friendship sometimes, I think God was probably protecting me from further hurt and heartbreak in that situation. As hard as it was to lose that friendship, God has given me many friendships since that loss that I have grown to love and appreciate more. If you are facing that, I would recommend praying about it, and also finding someone to talk to as well. Friendship losses hurt and are often really hard to go through. They are, unfortunately, a common thing to face in life. I have gone through them before, and they are tough. They are heartbreaking to face. It does eventually get better, but it definitely takes time to heal. If you are facing that right now, please reach out to me. I want to help if I can. Don't try to face it on your own. Surrounding yourself with people who will support you through it can be super helpful, and it can make such a difference too. Even if you have someone who will walk with you through it, they are still hard, regardless. I'm not at all trying to minimize the pain or make you think it doesn't matter. The truth is that it really does matter, and that you need to have people to support you through it. Facing it alone will not help as much. You can also turn to God because He is trustworthy and He wants to help you through it as well. I am so thankful to have people in my life that are willing to help me through trials I face. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please follow, leave a comment and/or review of my podcast if you haven't already, and please follow my podcast page on Facebook so you never miss an update. If you have any verses you'd like me to read on a future episode, or if you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org, send me a message on my podcast page on Facebook, or a voice message through the link in the show notes, and I will get back to you when I can. Hope you tune in next week for the 35th episode.